Hello. I would like to talk to you now about Bayes' rule. So imagine that I told you that I was going to have a video of somebody that I'm about to show you, a guest video, and ask you to estimate the probability that the guest was going to be male. What would you say? Well, probably you would say 50% because 50% of people are males, 50% of people are females in the world. What if I then told you, oh yes, and the person in our guest video is over 7 feet tall. Then I ask you to estimate the probability that they'd be male. What would you say? You'd probably then estimate the probability to be much, much higher than 50% because most of the people who are over 7 feet tall are in fact male. Now, the point of this is what's called Bayesian updating, and I'll show you how to do it in a minute. But this is the idea that we might have to estimate the probability of something, and then we get additional information, and we update our belief. So we call the original probability our belief, and then we get new information, and we update that belief to reflect the new information. So there's a couple of points to take away from this. Again, you want to think about the world in terms of probabilities. I don't know what's going to happen, but I can assign probabilities to express my beliefs. That's thing number one. Thing number two, you can and should update your beliefs when you get new information. So a year from now, your beliefs should have changed. You should not believe the same stuff you believe now. Some things, of course, will remain the same, but if you get new information, you should definitely update your beliefs. The other thing is that Bayes' rule tells us how we should go about updating our beliefs. So I'm going to show you the principal way to do that. Okay. Imagine that we have a test. Right now, I guess I'll use a COVID example because everything is COVID. So we have a COVID test. Somebody's going to jam a Q-tip up into your nose and then put it on a tray, and you're going to get some answers back, and they're going to say either you have COVID or you don't, or you test positive or you test negative. Well, what does that mean? Well, that doesn't mean that you have it or that you don't have it. What that means is you have more information available to you now, and you should update your belief. So if you get a positive test, the first thing you should say is, what's the probability of getting a false positive? So there's reality, which is you either have COVID or you don't. And there's what the test says, which is that you have COVID or you don't. If you have COVID, the test says you have COVID, that's fine. I mean, that's not great because, now you're sick, but at least the test is telling you the truth. If you don't have COVID and the test tells you you don't have COVID, that's also fine. But if you do have COVID and the test tells you you don't have COVID, that's what's called a false negative because the test is negative, but it's false. And that happens, there's some question about how much that happens. Also, if you don't have COVID, but the test tells you you do have COVID, that's what's called a false positive because the test is positive, but the truth is not the same as the test. Keep in mind, it's always possible for tests to be wrong. The whole point of a test, we want to use a test. Why? Because it's cheaper and easier than discovering the truth. So, for example, you want to get into college, and as college people, we want to know whether or not you're going to be a good student. Well, it takes 4 years to figure out whether or not you're going to be a good college student. It's really hard. On the other hand, we can give you an SAT or an ACT, and that takes a couple of hours, and maybe it gives us a hint. But some people with high ACT or SAT scores do poorly in college, and some people with low scores do well in college. So it's not the truth, it's a test that's cheap and easy. Now, the better a test is, the more often it's going to tell you yes when the truth is yes and no when the truth is no. But no test is perfect, okay? How can a test go wrong for COVID, for example? Well, maybe you have allergies and you just sneezed right before they jammed a Q-tip in your nose and you cleared out everything that you had. Or maybe just now, maybe the person giving you the test has COVID, you just breathed it in and they swabbed it out of your nose and you don't have it, but you have the bacteria, the virus in your nose. Maybe the person mixes up your test with the other person in your car because you're doing drive-through testing. Maybe the person who's doing the testing is just like really, really drunk. Maybe the machine broke that day, right? I mean, machines got to break sometime. Maybe yours was a test that it broke on. Maybe they left your test sitting out in the sun all day and it's rotten. I don't know. I don't know exactly how the tests work. But all I'm saying is they're not perfect. And you got to keep that in mind at all whenever somebody has a test. Unfortunately, what we often do is we say, here's the test and this is the truth. We should not do that. Test is just additional information and we should update our truth. So how do we go about doing this? Well, once again, our friend Gerd Gigerenzer gives us a hint. He gave this actual question to doctors. For symptom-free women ages 40 to 50 who participate in screening using mammography, the following information is available for this region. The probability that one of these women has breast cancer is 0.8%, so less than 1%. It's 8 out of every 1,000. If a woman has breast cancer, the probability is 90% that she will have a positive mammogram test. If a woman does not have breast cancer, the probability is 7% that she will still have a positive mammogram test. What is the probability that a woman with a positive test has breast cancer? Now notice he said two things. He notes here that if you have breast cancer, then the probability is 90% that you'll have a positive mammogram, meaning it's an indication that you have breast cancer, which means that there's a 10% chance that you, if you have breast cancer, you'll have a negative mammogram that says you don't have breast cancer. He also notes the false negative rate, the false positive rate. If a woman does not have breast cancer, there is a 7% chance that she will still have a positive mammogram. This is really super confusing. He gave this to actual doctors, and I'll ask you what you think the answer is. But he gave this to actual doctors, and they weren't able to answer this question very accurately. But remember, our friend Gerd studies the psychology of statistics, so he said, well, the reason people can't answer is because all these probabilities confuse them. They're not sure what to do with them. So instead, what we should do is we should phrase this in a frequentist sort of a way and say, if there's this many people, then this many of them have it. So here's the question that he gave to people. For symptom-free women aged 40 to 50 who participate in screening for mammography, the following information is available for this region. Exactly the same question. He's going to give exactly the same probabilities, but specific. Out of 1,000 women, 8 will have breast cancer. Of these 8 women, 7 will have positive mammograms. So that's the 90%. Of the remaining 992 women, 70 will have positive mammograms. So that's the 7%. And he's rounding off here. And he's using just 1,000 because people can usually keep that number in their head. If he wanted to get rid of all the decimals, he might need to use 10,000 or probably 10,000 would do it in this case. Anyway, of the remaining 992 women, 70 will have positive mammograms. What's the probability that one with a positive test actually has breast cancer? And it's pretty clear to look. Of these 8 women, 7 will have positive, so there's 7 that have it. Of the remaining 992, 70 will have it. So there's 77 women who have positive mammograms. 7 of them have it, so it's 7 divided by 77, which is about 9%. And these are true numbers. These are the actual probabilities. He didn't just make these numbers up. This is actually what the statistics of mammography tell us, that not very many people have breast cancer. While there's not that many false positive results, so few people have it that even if you get a positive mammogram, you're less than 10% likely to have breast cancer. This is routine testing. This is just randomly testing the whole population. This isn't if you detect a lump or you have a history. That changes it because that's additional information. And as I've said, you should update your beliefs on additional information. But the bodies that recommend this stuff don't recommend that if you have a problem, you should get tested. They recommend everybody over a certain age should get tested. So this is random sampling. And if you randomly test people, almost none of them have it. Less than 1% have it. But the chance of a false positive is 7%, which means if you get a positive result back, either it's true, which is less than 1% of the time, or it's a false positive, which is 7% of the time. So it's more likely that you got a false positive than that you actually have breast cancer. Hopefully this never happens to you, but if you follow the recommendations, it's not that uncommon. If you or someone you know or loves does get a positive mammogram, don't freak out. It doesn't mean that you have cancer by a long shot. If you have other issues, you might revise your estimate of whether or not you have it, but just don't freak out if you're going to regular exams or somebody you know or love is going to regular exams and they get a positive result back. It's probably a false positive, which is why statisticians recommend against testing of asymptomatic individuals. All right, so how do we go about solving these? The best way to do it, of course, we want to convert it into numbers and be frequented, but if we use a probability tree, well, a frequency tree, then we can solve these things very easily. So the first thing we want to do, just like him, is pick some number of people that we're going to do. I like to pick 10,000 people as my default. If another number makes sense, by all means pick it. But the reason I like to pick 10,000 is because that won't give me any decimals as long as I have whole number percentages. Once again, if something else makes sense, like if you're counting hours, you might want some multiple of 12. If you're counting, people in the 50 states, you want to have some multiple of 50. That's fine. But in general, I like to start with 10,000. So let's do this problem again using 10,000. So we start with 10,000 people, and then we draw two lines. There's two groups of people out of that 10,000, and this is the truth. Some of them have cancer, and some of them don't. So this is the truth. Then we establish those numbers there. Then what we do is we say, okay, for these people who do have cancer, the test is going to give a different probability of a positive result. Hopefully, if it's a good test, it should give different probabilities of a positive result for people who have cancer and who don't. So it's going to give what do we say the number was? A 0.08 chance of cancer. 0.08 is how many people have cancer. It's going to, 90% of those people are going to get a positive result, and 10% of them are going to get a negative result. So some of the people are going to get a negative result even though they do have cancer. Then we look at the other group of people who are the people who don't have cancer, and in this case, 7% of them are going to have a positive test, which is wrong. 7% are going to get a incorrect positive or a false positive, and 93% of them are going to get correct negative. So now we've divided the people up into 4 groups, and we have people who have cancer and have a positive test, people who have cancer and have a negative test, people who don't have cancer and have a positive test, and people who don't have cancer and have a negative test. Now, if we want to ask the question, how many of the people who have positive tests actually have cancer, then we go and look at all the people who have positive tests, and we put that number on the bottom, and on the top we put just the people who have cancer and have positive tests. So we make that calculation, and we get about 9% in this case. So about 9% of the people who have positive tests have cancer. And this is important. So Bayes' rule gives us what's called conditional probability. So the probability of A given B. In this case, the probability of the A has cancer, and B, the thing that we're given, is the test result. Doctors and testers often specify, oh yeah, this test will give us 90%, it's 90% probable that it will give us a positive result if we have cancer. But this is the probability of a positive result given cancer. What we want is the probability of cancer given a positive result, because in life, we have test results. We don't know the truth. If we knew the truth, there's no point in taking the test. If I know you're going to be a good student, right? If I have a time machine and I can see what's going to happen when you go to college, you don't have to take the ACT. I don't care what you get on the ACT. If, on the other hand, I don't have a time machine, then I have a test, it might predict something it might not predict. Okay? So it's important to understand that you generally want the probability of the truth given the test, not the probability of the test outcome given the truth, because the truth's the thing we're trying to get at. So this one is actually near and dear to my heart. It's about HIV testing. And I had a friend who was going to join the Army. And one of the things you have to do when you join the Army, back when I was in high school, and probably still, you get a variety of tests, but one of the tests you get is an HIV test. So he got his HIV test and he got a positive test result back. And this is back in the 80s. So basically, they said, you have this very stigmatized disease that's going to kill you. And he was sad. I don't know whether that quite conveys exactly how he felt. He didn't share the test results with people until much later. But I remember when he got that, and he was not himself. Well, an HIV test, they don't want to give false positives on HIV tests because they're kind of a big deal. So you actually have to have positive results on two tests, the ELISA test and the Western blot test. So if you do not have HIV, so if you're HIV negative, then you're 99.99% likely to get a negative result. So 99.99% of the time, if you don't have HIV, it's going to tell you don't have HIV. And if you do have HIV, the test is actually also very accurate in this case. If you do have it, there's a 99.9% chance that it will actually detect it. So in this case, it's a pretty decent test in those ways. And at the time, about 1 every 10,000 people had HIV. So my friend has a positive HIV test. What's the probability he has HIV? Notice, these are two different things. The test says I have HIV. Now I got to say, oh, okay, I have some more information. Let me update my belief. So what do you think the probability that you have HIV is if it's 99.99% likely to say no if you don't have it, and 99.9% likely to say that you do have it if you do have it? Well, we can do a tree to calculate this stuff again. So once again, I'm going to take 10,000 people, and we have the truth. So the truth is that out of those 10,000 people, 1 of them have HIV, because the chance of having HIV is 1 in 10,000, and 9,999 of them do not have HIV. So we apply the test to the actual 1 person who does have HIV, and what we find is there's a 99.9% chance that he gets or she gets a positive test result back. So we're just going to put a 1 there, and there's a 0% chance that he gets a negative test result back. Now, out of the 9,999 people, 99.99% of them are going to get negative test results back. And 0.01%, not 0.01, 0.01%, which is 0.0001, are going to have a positive test result. But that means 1 person is going to have a positive test result who doesn't actually have the disease. And so if we look at this, what we find is we have 1 person who has a positive test result and has it, and 1 person who has a positive test result and doesn't have it. So the probability if you get a positive test result is 1 over 1 plus 1, or 50% chance. So there's a 50% chance that he has it. And he's still alive today, never got any treatment, so I'm assuming that was a false positive. He also, but it changed the course of his life. He decided not to join the Army because he went and his personal doctor gave him a test and he came back negative. And he said, I'm never taking another one of these tests again, because that was probably at that time the worst experience of his whole life. So it's important to understand that these tests can be wrong. And even if you have a test that's 99.99% likely not to screw up, if you're to give you a negative result if you're actually negative, if the disease is also very rare, then when you get a positive result, it's a 50-50 coin toss whether or not you actually have the disease. And this is kind of a big deal because there's been a lot of people who have gotten false positives and undertaken actions that they would not have taken if they had understood this. For example, many people have committed suicide, especially back in the 80s and 90s when the disease was a lot more stigmatized, because they were going to die anyway. They were going to die horribly, and they were going to die stigmatized. There's one case of a person, a woman actually, who got the HIV positive test back, and she realized, that she was going to die relatively quickly and kind of horribly. So she gave away her child to grandparents or whatever, and went into a halfway house, a hospice sort of care to die. And it turned out that was a false positive. So she wasn't actually infected with it. But when she was in the hospice care, she met somebody who was infected with it, and they had a romantic relationship, and so she did get it and die, even though she was not originally infected with it. There's also an interesting case that our friend Gerd Gingerenzer points out to us of somebody a guy who donated blood, and when you donate blood, they give you HIV tests, and he was sick. He had very many symptoms of HIV. He lost a lot of weight really quickly, and he was getting sick, and his ex-wife had HIV, but he gave blood 26 times and passed the test every single time. They later did some different testing, and they did find out that he had HIV, and he died eventually of AIDS, but he was able to donate blood and pass the test 26 times. I mean, it's not like he was trying to cheat here. He was just trying to be a decent human being and donate blood. But because the test can be wrong, this test happened to be wrong. Something about his particular body messed up the way the test worked. The point to this, though, is you can use Bayes' rule, create a probability tree, and understand that a test is not the truth. A test is something that we can use cheaply to identify the truth, and they're never perfect. Now, I can give you a test that can accurately predict whether or not you have something 100% of the time. For example, you want an Ebola test. Okay, I can 100% of the time identify people who have Ebola. Ready? You have Ebola, you have Ebola, you have Ebola, you have Ebola. It's really easy. The problem is, it also 0% of the time accurately identifies people who don't have Ebola. We can flip it around, and I can 100% of the time identify people who don't have it, but it leaves out people who do have it. Like I said, you don't have it, you don't have it, you don't have it, you don't have it. But any test that is supposed to discriminate between people who have something and don't, you're going through a security check at the airport. Are you a terrorist, not a terrorist? Or do you have COVID, not COVID? Or, I don't know, did you take a bath today, not take a bath today? There's different tests that you can do. We would like to let all the people who aren't terrorists and aren't contagious in and keep all the ones out. But you can't do that. Similarly, in the courts, you have to be, you're innocent until proven guilty, and they have to prove you guilty. What we would like is all the guilty people go to jail and none of the innocent people. But you can't do that. What you can do is have a test that favors one or the other, but sometimes innocent people are going to go to jail and sometimes guilty people are going to get off. It's just the way it is. You have to accept that and understand that this is just an additional piece of information. This isn't the truth of the world. But people just like to accept the test as true. In fact, our friend Gerd, and this is important, you have to be asymptomatic here, right? If you're, intravenous drug using, blah, 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 then your chances might be higher because that's additional information. But if you're asymptomatic, as people who join the Army typically are, then your chance is 50%. So our friend Gerd Gingerenzer got one of his graduate assistants, and he made this guy go to an AIDS clinic and get the AIDS test. He had no symptoms. He wasn't in a high-risk group or anything like that. And he asked all the HIV counselors, hey, look, what happens if the test comes back positive? And 19 out of 20 of them told him that means for sure that you have the disease. Only one person said it's possible that it could be a false negative, but it's very, very likely the test is very, very good. And even that person just acknowledged that the test could be wrong, but still said that it was very, very good. But in fact, if an asymptomatic person gets a test result that's positive, it's only 50-50 chance, which I don't want to go from a 1 in 10,000 chance of having a deadly disease to a 50-50 chance, but a 50-50 chance is pretty far off from a 100 chance. And I do feel sorry for this poor grad student because, to get an HIV test, you have to give blood, and one of the risk factors for HIV is intravenous drug use. So it took him like a year to go to all these things because he had to wait until his needle wound from the last blood test healed. So he got stuck like 20 times. He had to go like every 2 weeks to a different HIV counselor. Okay, so what do we have here? When we get new information, we should update our beliefs. Bayes' rule is the correct way to update those beliefs. And tests are just pieces of information. They can be wrong. No test is right all the time in both cases. And you use a probability tree to decompose a frequency tree to decompose the probabilities, which people have trouble with, into frequencies. Out of 10,000 people, what's going to happen? This is going to happen, this is going to happen. And you can solve these problems quite easily and understand what the truths are. I'm going to work some more. I have some videos down below with me working some of these problems, but I'll give you a chance to try some of them too. They're quite easy once you know how to do them. All right, I've got to go feed my dog. Thank you very much.